it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I'm a SWAT officer who was sent to investigate a rural Alaskan town. Perseverance could be considered as a true virtue that everyone should have, considering the fact that we as humans deal with a plethora of problems on a normal basis, from average inconveniences to downright panic-inducing situations. The general outcome of all these situations is adapting to them, overcoming them in some way, whether that be physically or mentally. It doesn't matter as long as the problem has been solved. Because if the problem isn't solved, it could result in death or deterioration of the psyche, both of which are highly undesirable for obvious reasons. But what if the situation has dozens of problems that seem to be progressively worse as you solve each one? What if you solve one problem to only cause a far greater one that requires even more energy and has the potential to cause greater suffering and trauma? How can you handle a situation that you once thought hopeful, only to be faced with utter darkness, and all you can do is try and hide? Well, this is where perseverance comes through. All living beings have the inherent will to live, and will protect that desire at all costs, casting fear, doubt, and hesitation away to see the next day. The saying that a cornered animal is deadly would be an understatement that could cause the arrogant to fall. I always thought the idea of instinct and survival were fascinating and could be considered part of my job that kept me alive, what with me being a police officer who would encounter a situation that was less than ideal to handle. Now, granted, I've only been one for about a year now. However, that doesn't mean I haven't seen a fair share of violent acts that have been committed on people who didn't deserve it. I went into this profession knowing that I'd see inhuman acts committed on people who truly did not deserve the cruelty that was brought upon them, which still didn't stop my anger when I saw each victim. My blood would boil, and I'd feel my skin get hotter, and my jaw clenched in frustration that I couldn't do a damn thing to help them. That they died in fear and were alone in their final moments. This always gave me that feeling that showed how cruel and unfair the world truly was. Well, my goal was to try and shine a little glimpse of light in an otherwise unforgiving world, and try to help where I could. Now, even though I think the world is cruel, it doesn't stop me from having an optimistic view of it to some degree. I still firmly believe that there still lies an unseen hope. People can show great compassion and humanity, even in darkness. A prime example would be the attack on September 11th, when people came together and helped one another instead of only thinking of themselves. This also shows why perseverance is important to humanity's continued survival, and how resilient we truly are. A dip in the road brought me back to my surroundings after I'd zoned out, contemplating humanity's perseverance. I was looking into what seemed to be an ancient forest that had trees towering above the pickup I was in. The man driving took a glance at me and then looked forward as we continued to move in silence. The man looked to be in his 60s from his salt and pepper hair and had a perpetually stern look to him, as if he didn't trust his surroundings in the least. His eyes seemed to lack light in a way, almost as if he's seen where the end of the road leads, which would make sense due to our profession. We had a brief conversation when I first arrived in Alaska, where he introduced himself as the police chief of the station I was being sent to. I dreaded the news when I heard that I was being assigned to a small Alaskan town, which was due to the fact that supposedly the town was mysteriously devoid of any crime or financial trouble, and I guess that caused some eyebrows to raise at the top of the chain. However, they couldn't send in anyone who'd be too suspicious, so they sent me. I was the most logical choice since I was fairly new and I'd managed to get into SWAT even though I hadn't been in the force for longer than a year and a half. I also passed the academy with flying colours. I did find the secrecy to be a bit tasteless, as I preferred to be honest, but well, I had no qualms with what seemed to be a simple recon mission. I should also mention that I had a bachelor's degree in law enforcement, so I'm sure that was put into why I was chosen too. After our initial conversation, the chief didn't utter a single word to me, and I didn't feel like breaking the silence either, so we continued in silence. That was until the town came into view. He stopped the car on the side of the road, and looked at me and said, "Listen, boy, you don't want to get involved with this town, so Just tell me the name of the officer who told your agency about the events happening so I can drive you back to the airport." I looked at him with confusion plastered onto my face. Well, mock confusion, as I'd already thought that he knew about my reason for being here, so I had to be prepared for a question like that. Well, he didn't know this, but I never failed to analyze what a person is capable of, and I knew as soon as I laid eyes on him that he was far smarter than my police commissioner gave him credit for. Now, I didn't fully understand why he used the word agency, or why he assumed someone ratted him out. He could have said administration, not agency, but I didn't have time to think about that, as I had to continue my confusion act. "Oh, what are you talking about? I'm here for training in harsh environments," I said with a confused tone. Now, I prefer to say half-truths instead of outright lying, as half-truths are far harder to detect, as you are in a way telling the truth, but just not the whole truth. He eyed me for a moment, then turned the key and we headed down the road to what would be my home for the foreseeable future. The town was as small and quaint as any small Alaskan town would be. Well, I guessed about a few hundred lived in the town from the view we were at. And it was covered in snow. One thing I hated was snow, especially for someone who was used to the hot climate like Texas, which is where I grew up. So this would be a very interesting stay. My one saving grace is that the uniform is long-sleeved and I'll be wearing Kevlar, which adds another layer of warmth. We reached the first house of the town, which should have been relieving after such a long drive, but a cold chill shot through my body as we crossed that house. It felt like hearing a sound when you're home alone. My throat went dry and my hair stood up as I surveyed the surrounding town, looking for the cause of this feeling. And that's when it hit me. The entire town was surrounded by a dense forest that seemed never-ending. This town felt truly separated from the rest of the world, as if it was in its own little world. And it made me bitterly aware that I was an outsider, almost like I was treading on ground that wasn't meant for me. This stark reality sent another shiver down my spine, as I realized I was stuck in this very town, and with that thought, I could have sworn the trees closed in even more, like a noose around my neck. As I started to think of how big a mistake I might have made taking this task on, we arrived at the police station, which in a way relieved me. The station was small and looked to be ancient compared to other stations I'd seen, with its sun-bleached walls that showed years of weather erosion. The sign was in an even worse state, with it missing almost all of its letters. Well, calling it a dump would be an understatement, seeing as it could hardly pass as a place that could be called safe. The chief didn't wait for me to get out of my stupor, as he walked straight to the front doors and entered the building. I began to walk, when again the forest caught my eye. The sea of trees had a calling to them. It was almost as if I was entranced by the forest, or more accurately, I suppose, would be entranced by what was in that ancient foliage. The doors to the station let out a squeak as I stepped into the main lobby. I was quite impressed by the size of the station, as it seemed to stretch on, halls that seemed to look never-ending. The station had a sterile feel about it, similar to a doctor's office, as nothing was hung on the walls, and the center desk didn't have anything but a prehistoric computer sitting atop it. I saw the chief enter the back section of the station, so I fast-walked to his side as he began to talk. "We don't have any available houses for you to rent, so you'll just have to stay at our motel while you work down here. You can find some better-fitting clothes at the convenience store down the road next to the motel. That's also the place you'll get your food, since we don't have a supermarket." I had expected both of these situations to be the case, as the town was barely even considered a town due to its size. It would still be a tad inconvenient. That couldn't be helped. He then suddenly stopped, which caught me off guard, and said, "Well, there are also some rules I'm going to tell you, and I won't repeat myself, so listen up. First, do not under any circumstance enter that forest. I don't care if you see the Yeti roasting marshmallows." Well, I wanted to interject, but he simply put his hand up and continued. "Second, you're the only SWAT officer here, so I won't need you. Your only job is to come into work, sit down at a desk, and fill out some paperwork. I don't care if you wear your gear or not, as the other officers come into work during nights, so also you won't encounter them. Well, I was stunned at this too. I was getting paid to do paperwork and sit there acting like I'm doing my job. Well, again, I was going to interject, but he put up his hand once more and said, "Finally, we'll get a standard squad car, which is what you'll use to go out and about with. Right, now that I have that out of the way, you're dismissed." I attempted to ask questions, but he just kept walking, so I decided to give up on that and head outside. As I started to walk away, he yelled, "Oh, your key's under the front desk." I rummaged through the front desk and found the metallic key under some papers. I exited through the front doors, and I remember seeing the lot with the squad cars to the right of the station, and pressed the key fob, hearing the beep of the first squad car on the lot. I unlocked the door and hopped into the driver's seat and started the engine. Well, I attempted to start it, as it didn't want to for the first few times until it roared to life. I found myself letting out a sigh, as I thought about what I'd just gotten myself into. My first stop was that convenience store to get some food and maybe a cheap heavy jacket or something to keep myself warm, or at least keep myself from getting frostbite. I found the convenience store, which seemed to be in a similar state to the police station. I entered and found a lady who looked to be in her late 60s, with frizzled grey hair and a face that was hardened with age, manning the register. I walked to the food section and found an assortment of food that could be potential candidates for my dinner. However, I just settled with a bag of chips and ingredients for a sandwich. With the food in hand, I went to find a small pack of water bottles that I also grabbed along the way. Now all that was left was to find a suitable jacket that could hopefully keep the throngs of cold out and keep me fairly warm. Sadly, I had no luck. There wasn't a single jacket within the store, so I let out a sigh of defeat and walked up to the register to pay for my items. As I was putting the items on the counter, the old woman started talking to me. "You better not trust anyone in this town. They'll kill you if you go into places you don't belong, boy." Her voice was haggard, and she sounded like a lifelong smoker. But that wasn't what truly caught my interest. It was her statement that had me captivated. "Oh, sorry, ma'am, but I must have misheard what you said." "No, you didn't, boy. These people are vultures who'll tear you apart if you allow them, especially if you dare break that one rule," she said with a tinge of hatred. "Do you, mean the rule about the forest?" I replied back. "Yes, boy. You enter that forest, you're a dead man if you come back." She let out a laugh then and proceeded to say, "If you make it out of that forest alive." "Are you saying that going into a forest would make them mad enough to kill me? That'd be an insane thing to do." The old lady chuckled and said, "You seem like a good kid, so listen to my advice. I know all too well the call of a hunt, and you, boy, oh, you're a hunter even if you don't realize it." And with that, she bagged all my items, but before I could leave, she said, "Oh, and here's an old parka that used to be my son's. Don't worry about buying it. You can have it." I thanked her for the gift and walked out of the building, only to be met with the frigid cold air, which resulted in me wrapping my arms around my chest in a futile attempt of trying to keep my body warm. I set the assorted bags of goodies on the ground and put on the newly acquired parka. I thought it was weird that she'd given me her son's parka, but I just assumed that her son must have moved away, so I didn't feel too bad for taking it. I could instantly feel the warmth creep back into my shivering body as I hopped into the car and took the short drive to the motel, where I parked in front of the lobby. I stepped back into the frigid air and briskly walked into the main lobby. Well, I guess a small, dingy room better befitted it than confusing it with a clean and normal-sized area. A stout woman sat at the counter and glanced up from her fashion magazine to eye me for a good 5 seconds before saying, "Your room's number 7. The key's on the counter. Also, the price of the room is $500 a week." I sighed as I set my card down and snatched the key from the counter. The woman took the card and slid it into a grungy card reader and set it back down on the counter. With both my card and key in hand, I exited the building, jumped into the car, looked for the room number, got out, and unlocked the room's door. I don't know why I was expecting a room that didn't look like it hadn't been cleaned since the 60s, but I was really starting to hate this place, and I mean really hate this place. I was no stranger to motels and hotels, due to me and my family being nomadic for a period of a year, but this room was downright nasty. It just had everything you might imagine, with its unknown stains, rotted carpet, mouldy walls, and a ceiling that was leaking an unknown substance. Yet, the room I was stuck in puts a dumpster to shame, but at least it was warm and the beds looked clean, so I guess it wasn't all bad, just mostly bad. I set my backpack down and began to empty the contents of it onto a discolored nightstand. I'd brought long-sleeve shirts, jeans, and my issued SWAT uniform. Only then I realized that packing a jacket would have been a smarter idea. But I assumed there would be jackets galore in a frozen town, but, well, the world is full of surprises, I guess. The backpack was more of a duffel bag, so I had room to fit all of that in there. I decided to put the clothes on the second bed to avoid them getting in a state where they'd need to be burned. I sat on the bed and began to think about how I was going to snoop without raising any suspicions or unwanted trouble. And during this period of thought, I noticed something from the small crack between the curtains of the room mat. A woman was standing on the edge of the forest looking inward, as if she saw something in that void of blackness. I got a sudden urge to stop her from entering that forest, but I remembered what that old croon had said to me back at the convenience store, and how going into the forest would mark my end. I let out a heavy sigh as I pulled the parka over my torso and reached to grab my gun from the duffel bag, only to realize that I was forced to leave it behind because of the policy of not having guns on a plane, and this caused an irritated grunt, as I had to go unarmed into a forest which could have housed bears or wolves. There was no time for belly aching, though, as I opened the door slowly to make sure there wasn't a soul around, and quickly, under the guise of night, darted over to the forest's edge. I made about halfway when I noticed that the woman seemed to have quite a big bump in her stomach region. This made me continue to think how bizarre of a situation this was, and she must have been pregnant and far into her third trimester. As I neared the woman, she stepped into the forest in a swift motion, and I came to a halt once I reached the spot where her feet had left indentations in the snow. I looked ahead to see a forest that was covered in a deep blanket of snow, and gave the canopy of trees a strange glow that made the forest look almost supernatural. Despite the biting chill, I pressed on after the woman, now more out of curiosity than anything else, and the wind bore down on me from what felt like all directions as my legs slowly sank deeper into the sea of snow. I heard a low rumble coming from a patch of snow to my right, which caused me to whip my head to my right side to check what the rumble was. I was met with a patch of bright green grass, and this scene caused my brain to sputter as I wondered why and how the grass was growing. I then turned my head around and was met with a similar scene in all directions. The biting chill of the cold had vanished altogether, and I was standing in a lush forest. I tried to swallow, but the spit got caught in my throat. My entire being was on high alert. The current situation I found myself in was just wrong. I've been in my fair share of uncomfortable situations, but this took the top spot. A forest that was once buried deep within snow seemed to instantly flourish and grow and erase any trace of winter. I could even smell the newly blossomed roses of a nearby rosebush. My heart was racing and my head began to ache from the amount of stress that was building within my body. And that's when I saw from the corner of my eye a black object slinking along bushes to the right of me. I whipped my face to the right and saw the rustle of the bushes and an unearthly growl that sent a biting fear throughout my body. I was trained to break out of the lizard brain during training, but my body wouldn't move. It's as if that growl wasn't just threatening me with death, it was threatening me with a fate worse than death. As I stared at the bushes, I managed to start moving my hand. Well, that was a good start, so I used my hand to pinch my cheek as a way to stimulate my body into action. It worked, and I could feel my feet come under my control again, and as soon as I had control of my body, I slowly began to backpedal away from the source of the noise. I made it about 7 steps before a pitch-black paw exited the bush, and as I looked at the paw, or what I assumed to be a paw, my head started to ache, and the longer I looked, the more out of place the appendage seemed. The dark shape seemed to transform the more I stared, so I yanked my head away from the object and looked to my left side. That lasted a good 5 seconds before another paw-like object came forth, and this hastened my backpedaling as I was no longer concerned with tripping or hitting a tree. Then, what seemed to be a head popped out of the bush. The vaguely head-like object was something that would belong in my nightmares. It had long, jagged teeth. Its canine teeth were jutting out of its mouth, showing the blood-red tinge it had on them. Its eyes were pits of crimson red that had bloodlust seeping out of them as it stared directly into my eyes. This dog-like creature had a long snout that pointed into a razor-like edge, along with its huge ears that were in a position that seemed like it was preparing to pounce. My entire body screamed at me to run. Every fiber of my being knew that if I didn't run, I would meet a grisly end. And I agreed. This monstrosity that stood in front of me was going to rip me apart piece by piece. So I whipped myself around and ran. I knew turning my back to it was a terrible idea, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get the hell away from that monster. This was a mistake, as I felt a sharp pain in my back and was sent flying for a couple of yards, only to be then slammed chest first into a tree. I slid down the tree trunk and coughed up blood. I was sure that all of my ribs on my right side were crushed, and about half my left ones were broken. I was having trouble breathing. When I did breathe, pain shot through my body, indicating that bone had torn through one of my lungs. I started to feel warm liquid seep down my leg, meaning that the creature tore my back to what I assumed to be shreds. The grass under me became a deep red pool of blood, which began to gather on the patch of grass. I attempted to lift myself from the spot where I lay. However, my shoulder screamed in pain when I tried, so I could also include a broken shoulder blade on top of my injuries. For a few moments I just lay there groaning until I felt the beast bite into my leg and toss me into the air, causing blood to gush out of my numerous wounds. The creature brought its paw up and slashed my face with it, which again sent me hurtling through the air. This time I landed on a rock back first with a resounding thud. I blacked out when I hit the rock for a few seconds, and when I came to, I could see the monster approaching me. I could also see the devilish grin on its face as it approached. It was enjoying this. So the main goal now was to make me suffer as much pain as it could. This caused something to snap in my head, and I began to laugh uncontrollably. I couldn't believe this was happening. This shouldn't be happening, definitely not to me. I couldn't believe my luck. First, I got to a cold wasteland akin to some sort of hell, and then I got attacked by some weird creature. This situation felt surreal as I stared at the beast. All the pain I'd once felt drained away, and I could finally stand once again, so I reached for a medium-sized rock that lay near me. At that moment, I wasn't going to go down without a fight, no matter how futile it would be. I was determined not to die without one. So I gritted my teeth and walked as best I could towards the monstrosity. Its smile now grew to an immeasurable size, and it pounced towards me. Its movements were a flash, but I managed to land a solid and hard strike as it neared me, and this caused the head of it to swing to the left, and some form of liquid trickled out of the wound on the left side of its face. It then backed up a few steps before pouncing again. This time it was too fast, and I could see it was going for my throat, so in that instant I decided to guard it with my left arm. The creature bit deep into my arm and began to savagely shake it like a dog who was attacking someone might do. The pain fueled my rage again, so I began to repeatedly smash the rock onto the monster's face over and over and over again. My right wrist ached, my hand was going numb. I could feel the blood loss start to affect me as my eyes seemed to grow foggy, and my hand was losing power. The monster finally ripped my left arm off and once again pounced. I pushed the rock into its mouth, but it just bit through it, taking some of my fingers along with it. It pushed past my arm and sunk its teeth deep into my throat. Blood exploded from my mouth as I made futile attempts to push it off, only to find it biting me harder. The pain returned and my body could no longer handle the blood loss, so I wasn't surprised to find myself falling back onto that rock. The monster began to savagely rip my jugular out, and as it did that, it raised its paw once again and brought it down to my face. This time it ripped through my right eye with its middle claw, and then it slowly ate my jugular in front of me as some sort of reward. Oh, people always said that your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. But for me, all I saw was the creature slowly finish off my jugular and then proceed to eat my left arm. At that moment, all I felt was resignation. I tried my best and did all I could, but I still lost. As I was thinking this, I looked past the creature with my remaining eye and saw something peculiar. 2 people were approaching the creature. One of the 2 was a scrawny man who had messy black hair and glasses that were too big for his face that also concealed his eyes, and he was fiddling with his red tie that matched his red suit. The other was a woman that seemed to be around my age, with blonde hair that bordered on white and was in slight disarray. I could see that her eyes were a scarlet red. She wore white camouflage akin to a hunter's. I also noticed the weapons they were carrying. The man was holding a giant sword that was bulky and had to be at least 50 pounds, while the woman held a hunting rifle with a bayonet attached to the end of it. The creature finished eating my arm and turned its head toward the pair, and a low noise started to come from it, almost as if it was laughing. The pair stopped a couple of yards away from the beast and whispered to one another and sent glances my way. I didn't have time to think anymore. I needed to sleep, and my eyelids shut without resistance, and all I saw was darkness. I was weightless in an infinite void. At this point it didn't matter if my eyes were closed or open, as the darkness assailed me from both ways and was constant in the feeling of what I could feel as, well, nothing. I wasn't sure how long I floated through the expanse, as it felt like decades, but I was sure it was mere seconds that had passed. I continued in this limbo for a while. I fell asleep a few times, which was weird as I come to the conclusion that I was now dead. However, as I started to feel the boredom creep up on me like a fox on a rabbit, a man appeared in this vision. The man that appeared before me surprised me. It was the same guy from the woods who was jittery. The man then turned to face me and let out a nervous chuckle and said, "Ah, you sure are hard to find. Like, what even is this place?" This caused me to pause. He said that he'd had to find me, which meant I was not dead. Well, good start. I replied, "When you said, 'find me,' what do you mean by that? Am I dead or not?" He shifted and said, "Well, that's hard to explain, and we don't have an abundance of time, so I'll just tell you what I meant to tell you, which is that you're in a dream, so I'm going to tell you how to get out of it." He said this with some urgency that further showed his readiness to get out of this place. "Okay then, hurry up and tell me the way out," I said with a confused tone, and this caused his face to go red. He said with a slightly annoyed tone, "You have to walk forward until you reach the edge of this plane." While he was talking, I thought I heard the creak of his teeth as they neared being shattered due to his airtight, clenched jaw. "So, I just walk forward until I fall off? That easy?" I replied with a somewhat skeptical tone. He gave a curt nod of his head and then began to say, "Yep, it's that easy. You should know." As he was talking, he suddenly disappeared from the spot he was in. It was as if he was never there. He literally disappeared in the blink of an eye. I stood for a moment longer, an alien feeling taking over me as I contemplated what I'd been doing this entire time. I never attempted to move forward, only to stay where I was. That's when I resolved to go forward finally into the dark. Well, the first step was the hardest, as it felt as if I'd forgotten how to walk. But after the third and fourth steps got easier. This continued until I was jogging to eventually running through the endless wave of darkness. And this continued to the point where my lungs screamed in pain, my legs ached from the constant strain I was putting them through, and my throat was stark dry. And then, as if my feet were on a rug that had been suddenly snapped away, I was falling. Part 2. I jumped up from the spot I was lying in, my bed soaked from the sweat. I breathed in, as I felt like I'd just woken from the dead. It took about a minute to regain control of my breathing, as it was erratic and would only allow me to take shallow inhales of air. But as I regained control, I started to see the state of what was once my room. Now, the reason I say once was, is for the fact that I must have been dragged off into a luxury penthouse, as the room had furniture that seemed to have some kind of gold outline on some or most of it. The furniture had a sharp and modern look to it, and I could tell from a glance that it was made of top-quality material. I shuddered from the suspected price of all this. I glanced over to the black duffel bag on the mahogany table. It was in stark contrast to the rest of the room. I pushed myself off the bed and walked over to the duffel bag that sat on the table and began to inspect it. It was a plain duffel bag that you might buy anywhere, so I unzipped the bag to take a look at the contents. What I saw surprised me. The first item was a uniform I was extremely familiar with. It was my standard issue uniform as SWAT, which included a matching shirt and pants, along with a heavy Kevlar vest that had a pistol holder and a knife holster. A bulletproof helmet and a black ski mask with the skull design were also among the clothes. Under all of that was a black tactical belt that had pouches for ammunition, along with a holster for a pistol and a place for a knife. And under all of that sat a pair of matching Glock 18s with two black tactical knives sitting alongside them. All of this baffled me, as I was certain that I hadn't had any guns or knives on me, as they were against flight regulations, so how I'd gotten them was extremely confusing. And the uniform and gear were made of different material, which was rougher and heavier than my last set. Then I looked towards the front door and saw a huge crate sitting to the left of the door frame, which went across until it reached a window that had its curtains drawn. I stopped at the middle of the crate and leaned over to pop the two locks that held it down. And when I opened the crate, all I could do was stare in dismay. The crate had an MP5 along with black combat boots that sat upon a mountain of magazines for the Glock and MP5, enough ammo to supply a small army. That's when I came to the realization that something had happened to me. That's also when I remembered the events that had transpired in that forest. All of this gave me a dull headache, as I contemplated what could be a plausible and reasonable explanation for what was going on, and why I had enough armaments for me to take on an army. All I could come up with was some wild theories and conspiracies, so I resolved myself to get some fresh air and headed for the door. I grasped the gold handle, twisted it and pushed the door open, and was met with a hallway that led to either a dead end or an elevator. So I made my way towards the elevator and pressed the button to what I assumed to be the ground floor. Stereotypical elevator music assaulted my ears as I made my way down the 7 floors until I felt the elevator land at its destination. I walked through the lobby, ignoring the tired receptionist, and walking to the sliding glass doors. I walked through the doors, and what I saw and felt caused me to choke in surprise. The scene that greeted me made me feel a mixture of astonishment and surprise, both of which were intense and equal in caliber. The road was full of people walking along sidewalks, adorned with vendors who were hollering for people to check their wares, and insisting on the prestige of their items in equal measures. I also noticed the heat and cool breeze that accompanied the scene. It felt as if it was a midsummer afternoon. It caused my skin to tingle from the humidity that was mixed in. The buildings were also in an almost pristine state, as if the city had just been built a year ago. The sidewalk had an unearthly white hue to it that indicated it being just paved, as did the roads, along with a straight double yellow line in the middle. The buildings were densely packed together, similar to a city. But this city was a majestic sight to behold, quickly realized, however, that this wasn't the rural Alaskan town I'd initially arrived in, which brought the question of how I got from there to here. I had no recollection of ever getting in a car or on a plane after I'd been attacked. That thought caused me to yank my phone out and go to the camera. So I flicked the camera and confirmed my thoughts. I did indeed have a long and jagged scar along my right eye where the creature had slashed me. I opened and closed my eye several times. I even rubbed my eye with my finger, but everything was fine with it. I could see perfectly through it, and it didn't hurt in the least. It was as if the scar had just been painted onto my face, instead of my face having been ripped apart by a giant claw. I moved the camera up to my neck, but there was no trace of a scar there. I retraced my steps back to my room on the 7th floor. When I reached the door, I cursed myself, as it required a keycard to get in. I rummaged through my pockets in some vain hope that it would be there, but to my surprise, in my right pocket was a rectangular keycard. I swiped the card into the slot and heard the click of the lock retracting into the door. I pushed the door open and entered, and then closed the door and headed toward the bathroom. As expected, it was huge compared to your typical bathroom, and had a sharp modern look, with its gold and black accented open shower that matched the sink and toilet. As I walked across the tiles towards the sink mirror, I had a sense of wonder in seeing if my assumption was correct. Sure enough, the mirror showed a man in his mid-20s with semi-wavy auburn hair, with light blue eyes that took an almost grey hue. A jagged scar that started just above my eyebrow went down across my eyebrow and continued down my cheek and ended just under my lip. My pupil also had a somewhat jagged line through it, as if it had been split in two. But there was no pain and my eye was completely fine. The scar seemed to be purely cosmetic. I looked again at my neck and saw no scars. I then took off my white t-shirt and looked at my torso. Again, there wasn't a single blemish from the fight. I let out a long sigh of confusion and put my shirt back on and headed toward my room door. Once I reached the door, I turned toward the crate that had the boots in and put them on. The pair fitted perfectly. This situation seemed to be shrouded in one mystery after another, and just as a headache was beginning to creep on, I heard a shrill ringing come from my phone that lay on the nightstand next to one of the beds in the room. I reached out and picked up the white ringing phone and put it next to my ear. A deep silence permeated from the other end at first. Then a voice shattered it with a simple, "Hello?" The voice that came with the word made me break out into a cold sweat. The voice was strained and sounded like a creature was mimicking it. This voice had an edge which made it sound almost too perfect for a person to have. This voice left my throat dry as if I'd forgotten how to speak. The voice went on. "No need to respond, as this is a simple warning. If you have any interest in avoiding what'll happen next, then I implore you to put this phone down and simply walk out. Nothing too complicated nor challenging. All that needs to happen is for you to walk away." Well, I couldn't resist and said, "What happens if I stay?" The voice that I could now discern as male let out a deep and resounding chuckle as he said, "I guess you've chosen." And with that the line went dead. The blaring of the phone masked a new sound. This sound was muffled at first, sounding as if something was being dragged across the floor and hitting a wall. But as each second passed, the noise grew in volume and seemed to get closer. I also noticed that it had been getting faster and faster. The noise was so close that it sounded like it was barreling through the room. I was then forced to leap out of the spot I'd been standing in as a hulking beast burst through the wall. Splinters of wood flew throughout the room as I crashed into the crate holding the ammo, my body half sliding down the side and half laying on top of it. And the creature swung a huge limb at me that seemed to be tangled and gnarled by a thick bundle of barbed wire. I narrowly scrambled down the crate, managing to dodge the attack, except for a small gash that flowed crimson on my cheek. Time seemed to slow, and my heart seemed to be ready to burst from my chest as I thought about my options. I could no longer get the MP5 from the crate, as the beast was a few centimeters from it, leaving me with only one option. I crawled between its bloated legs, and as I got behind it, I managed to half stumble, half run to the table that had the knives and the pair of Glocks. The creature had amazing reflexes for a thing its size, and it twisted around and attempted another bludgeoning attack, again narrowly missing me, only leaving me with its stench. I slammed into the table, grabbing one of the knives with my left hand and one of the Glocks with my right. I let out a triumphant laugh as I swung the gun toward the hulking mass and squeezed the trigger. But instead of hearing a booming gunshot, I got a click, which caused my heart to sink. The weapon wasn't loaded. I had now completely exposed myself, so when the monster pummeled my side with its barred fist, I wasn't caught off guard. No, I just flew through the wall of my neighboring room and landed on its bed. I'd been winded from that punch, but managed to pull myself out of the way of the next attack. Still had enough stamina left to barrel through the door and run down the hallway into a nearby staircase. As I stumbled down the staircase, doing 2 or 3 steps at a time, I could still hear the hulking mass follow me. Luckily for me, the creature's hulking stature provided ample distance between it and me. As I reached the door to the 6th floor, reality slammed me with another obstacle. The dog-like creature from the forest was blocking my way to the rest of the staircase. I pushed the door to the 6th open and brought it to a slamming shut just as the dog stuck its snout between the door and the doorframe. In my rush, I raised my left arm and brought the knife down onto the snout that was preventing the door from shutting. The creature let out a howl that sounded broken and had a wet gurgling to it as if it was choking. But that didn't stop me as I pulled the knife out and swung again and again and again. I then slammed the door hard on the snout of the monster and darted forward. There was no escape, no matter how hard I looked. My body was numb from the constant pain and aches my body was going through, and I knew I wouldn't be able to go on much longer. I reached a giant window that marked the end of my road. The city that lay below would have been a magnificent sight if not for my current predicament. The city gleamed from the sunset that was befalling it, painting it in a beautiful crimson hue, further marring its innocent look. I heard giant thumps and an animal on all fours making its way toward me. This was the end. There was no way forward. Wait. The window. I looked below it and saw a dumpster that seemed to be close enough for me to make it into. Oh, this idea obviously had disadvantages. Would I survive landing in the dumpster? Either way, I was going to die standing here, so I might as well go out on my own terms. So I stepped far enough back to get a running start and charged at the window with my shoulder in a battering ram position. I slammed into the pane, shattering it into pieces that flew into my face, leaving tiny cuts. And I felt a shard plant itself deep into my shoulder, but I didn't have time to think as I plummeted down. I tried to make my way to the dumpster but failed miserably. I felt something strike my head, like a comet falling to earth, and instantly I blacked out. I was once again in the dark abyss as before, but this time it seemed like it was slightly lighter, as if there was a light source somewhere. I took a brief look around me to see what it was, and found a faint glimmer in the distance. The man wasn't around this time, so I decided to walk toward the source of the glimmer, making me feel more at ease than the time I'd run blindly in the dark. Walking was going to take too long, so I broke out into a sprint once again. My lungs somehow no longer ached from the previous mad dash. After a while I started to grow tired again, and just as I was about to stop for a break, I fell once again into the dark. This time I awoke in the dumpster, on a nice pile of trash that smelled like rancid meat. I groaned at the thought of the stench being on me, then saw a small lizard run along my thigh down to my foot and jump off. Gripping the edge of the dumpster, I pulled myself up. As I took my hand away, I felt slick wetness on my left hand. Lifting my hand to examine it, I saw dark red blood. I turned to look at the spot and, sure enough, found a sizable stain of blood on the edge of the dumpster. My heart started to race as my right hand flew to the back of my head. I didn't feel anything, but I knew that I had hit the edge, as I could still feel the moment that my head had collided with an object. I'd fallen from the 6th floor at a fast speed. I should be dead right now. So how am I alive after that fall? I looked up to the sky to get a bearing as to the time. It seemed I'd been out all night, as the sun was starting to rise over the horizon. I hopped out of the trash heap and wearily stood, as my legs had cramped from the sudden movement. I did some movements to stretch my back and arms, and set off to the front of the hotel. However, before I could reach the end of the side alley that lay just beside the hotel, a paper of some sort crashed into my face. I snatched it away and looked down at it. The paper was some sort of advertisement for a warehouse that sold mannequins. I crushed it into a ball and threw it toward the dumpster. As it flew towards its goal, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A pool of dark liquid lay in front of a pile of trash bags. The origin of this pool was out of sight, and so curiosity compelled me forward in some kind of self-fulfilling investigation. As I rounded the mound of black bags, I saw a sight that was blood-stopping. There lay a young woman that appeared to have been in her early 20s. The woman's right leg was twisted beyond recognition, and what remained of her left arm was a ragged stump that was ripped off savagely. The right arm was hanging from a thin piece of tendon. Her foot was missing, and the torso was gouged, organs laying all around her in some sort of sadistic circle. The only thing normal about the woman was that her face was serene, with no marks or blood shown on her soft features. Even her brunette hair was immaculate, and went smoothly with her makeup. Her sharp green eyes seemed to look through the world. No, it seemed to look through the thing that had attacked her, and some kind of understanding formed in her final moments. The tears went unnoticed. Realization that there was no reason for her to die set in before the rage. The rage was an all-consuming fire. My teeth gritted, my hands formed into a fist in such an absolute way that my fingernails drew blood. I didn't know this woman in front of me, but the fact that she died like this, in a dingy alley full of trash, alone, is what ignited the fire. No one deserved a fate or punishment like this. Well, except for whatever had done this. I had to find what did this, and I already had an idea about how to do that. As I was in mid-thought, I heard footsteps approach from my right. I looked in that direction to find the jittery man from the forest, and from that place. He had a sullen expression as he looked at the young woman. His jitters had evaporated as he stared deeply at her. He then looked up at me and said, "That's a damn shame about her. She had a promising future ahead. Sadly, fate had other plans for her." He then bent down and pushed her eyelids closed, adding another layer of calm to her face. What the hell is going on? My pent-up confusion and frustration were at a boiling point now. Ever since I'd gone to that damn town, my life had been a giant shit show. Well, I was tired of running. I was tired of the blood, and more than anything, I was tired of how powerless I'd been. Another headache formed as the man looked into my eyes, or so I assumed, as his bulky glasses were concealing them. "Yeah, I can understand that, but I'm not the one who's going to explain. I'm merely a messenger," he said, and this was said with a tone of finality to it, leaving no room for questions as he pressed on. "Well, I guess I'm more like a taxi, so I don't have a message." He added a fake chuckle, failing to ease the thick tension. He lifted his hand and muttered some sort of sound. Well, I say some sort, as my mind couldn't process it. Then a deep white sprung forth from his outstretched hand and momentarily blinded me. I threw my hands atop my eyelids as I rubbed at the burning sensation. It subsided after a few seconds of doing so, and as I opened my eyes and looked at my surroundings, I realized that I wasn't in that alley anymore. I was in some sort of office. Desks lined the room in various arrangements that opted for a more open layout. There was little time to survey the area. The people that stood looking at me with mouths agape told me that this had surprised them just as much as me. They shot their hands up and pointed at me, all producing the same sound as the jittery man. Different beams of light exploded from all of their hands. The light was far less overwhelming than the man with the glasses had been, but I could feel the light implode on my body as it connected with me. But, well, I didn't feel a single thing, nor was I hurt. Smoke flooded across me like some kind of mist blocking my view. I looked at my body, and not even my clothes seemed to be ruffled in the slightest. I could feel the magic that had assailed me. It almost had a sticky feel to it, like when the humidity is high and you can feel it. I then noticed that the smoke could be used as my escape, so I quietly moved through it in the opposite direction from my assailants. At least, that's what I thought until I ran into one of them. It was a woman around my age, with long black hair, vibrant blue eyes, with a light tan on her skin. What scared me most was the devilish grin that was plastered onto her face, almost like she enjoyed this. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. Her hands were starting to glow bright red, energy swirling like a vortex. I gulped hard and prepared for what would surely be an unpleasant time. And that was before a howl made the room grow into an overbearing silence, one that was followed by sickly tension. The smoke still crowded my view of the area, only allowing me to glance at this woman. She sprang out of the cloud of smoke, leaving me alone. Well, I wasn't in dreadful silence for long, as shortly after the woman had left, I heard screams of terror and pain. These sounds cascaded the room in a delirious motion. I could hear desks being knocked into, papers falling, bodies being slammed into things. It was a symphony of blood and terror. I finally decided that running would be the best course of action, so I darted again through the smoke and made it out after about 5 seconds of motion. And that was a mistake, as I ran headfirst into another one of those damn monsters. This time it looked like a bloodhound, and it was a good 2 or 3 feet taller than me. A body hung from its maw, like an ornament hanging from a Christmas tree, and the ears of the beast perked up as if it had just received a pleasant surprise. A cold chill ran through my body as I surveyed the dog-like creature with its razor-sharp claws, crooked legs, hunched back, and decaying skin. It put one hideous leg forward. It seemed to cover 12 feet of space. I went to my knife holster out of instinct, even though I was sure I dropped it when I fell out of the building. However, planted in the sheath was my knife. I had no time to think about how it ended up there, as I drew it out, readying for an attack. But before we could make contact, a bright red vortex collided with the dog-like creature's head, violently rocking it. The origin of this blast was from the girl. This time she had a furious look on her face, and the cause of that look would be from how the thing had massacred her friends, undoubtedly. This also caused the thing to let out a vicious snarl and charge at her. Its jaws opened to an unnatural degree, threatening to consume her whole. I watched as she nimbly dodged out of its way and let out a series of 4 blasts before it even knew what had happened. Its snout crinkled and its eyes burned with hatred as she was merely playing with it. That's when its legs straightened and its back grew a camel hump, or, more accurately, a mini mound on its ugly back. The next second it turned into a blur of motion as it leaped at max speed toward the woman, and as it got to her, it jabbed her ribs, making a resounding crack. Blood spurted from her mouth, and she crashed into a wall, sliding down it. Well, this was the last straw. My feelings now seared, the tiredness I felt, the confusion, the fear, the pain, the hopelessness, powerlessness. All of this formed into a single feeling now. Anger. I gritted my teeth and white-knuckled my blade. I rushed at the beast while it was still looking at the woman, catching it by surprise. I jumped onto its back and drove the knife into the mound. It roared in agony and began to throw me off. I plunged the knife in again. My left hand slipped and I collided with a nearby desk, and the dog lunged on top of me and opened its maw. It shot forward, but I used my arm as a shield. Its teeth tore down to the bone, making my brain go fuzzy from the pain. I pushed the edges of darkness back and started to plunge my knife into its chest. It then also bit harder, and I could feel my bone break as it went through it. I cried out in pain and plunged the knife into the teeth of the monster, which caused it to let go of my now mangled left arm. I arched my hand in a cleaving motion and went straight for its neck. It must have had the same idea, as it went for my neck, but before it made contact, the woman from earlier shot a blast of red light. It connected with the snout of the creature, and I could see that it had shattered the right side of it. I brought the blade down, causing a slight injury to it, but, well, I was determined to fully lob its head off. The anger I felt made the process easier than expected. The dog creature's yelps dwindled to whines, and then fell completely silent. It seemed like the ordeal was over, and a relieved feeling came over me, even though I was surrounded by a mound of bodies. I think the only people that survived were me and the lady, who was now standing and staring at me. The adrenaline slowly faded, and I began to feel my eyelids grow heavy. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the woman who'd started walking towards me. That's when my feet gave out and I was falling. The last sensation I felt was something grabbing me before once again I felt nothing. Part 3. A late October sunrise fell on a police station. The orangish-red hue that cascaded its brick walls gave a warm look to it. The inside of the serene police station was quiet. 3 people sat with different police officers discussing problems they had that required a higher power. A young rookie who joined the force a week earlier sat with his FTO. Both of them were questioning an old, disheveled man. The man grew increasingly distraught, and the FTO started to grow annoyed with the conversation. The rookie stared out of a giant window that sat in front of the police station. The rookie had achieved his childhood dream of becoming a cop. Sure, it had only been a week, but he still had high hopes of what he could achieve. He thought of how he could now help the people who needed it, maybe even get an award or 2 for heroism. But that would be the last time the rookie would get to have such idealistic thoughts, because through that window he saw a grotesque creature slink to the door. The woman at the reception desk let out a loud, "What the hell?" as it made its way to the door. The surrounding officers all swiveled their heads to the lady and looked where her now shocked face was staring. That's when the room of both veterans and rookies exploded in a commotion as people scrambled out of their seats and went to get a closer look, hands hovering over their service pistols. The rookie and FTO went to corral the civilians further into the police station, where they thought it would be safest for them. The reason for all this rash decision-making and paranoia was due to a thick tension in the air, akin to having a random person walking up to you and shoving a gun in your face. As the rookie and FTO walked back to the others, they heard shots ring out, and this caused them to break out in a dead sprint as they rushed to the others. By the time the 2 of them had made it, half the officers laid mangled, and the walls had a fine red sheen to them. The other half were frantically yelling and shooting, and the beast shrugged the bullets off and pounced on 3 officers at once. One swift flick of its pitch-black paw caused a fountain of blood to spray onto a nearby plant. The others looked on in horror as this monster butchered their friends. Tears clouded their vision as the creature picked them all off. The rookie and FTO tried to get them to snap out of it, but it was a futile attempt, and their blood froze as the wolf set its crimson pits upon them. The beast first took out the FTO, ripping his chest in 2. Then it went on to the rookie, who put up a surprisingly good struggle as he kicked and punched the snout of the creature. Well, this unsurprisingly annoyed it, and with one fell swoop, it slammed the rookie's head into the ground, causing his blood to deepen the red of his auburn hair. I opened my eyes to a blinding light. My eyes shifted to the beaming source and surveyed my surroundings. The room was bare, only having a side table and an IV which was hooked into my arm, along with some sort of computer. I attempted to get up, but my sore body protested, so I didn't bother continuing my attempts. I let out a sigh as I looked for a possible button to call a nurse, none of whom were around. With nothing much left to do, I closed my eyes as another wave of tiredness overtook me. I then woke up again to an empty room, trying to look for a window to get any semblance of the time, but I noticed there aren't any windows and the door is a plain grey door with no window on it. The silence is soothing, making the hell I'd lived through seem like a distant memory. Actually, this gave me time to recount the events that had taken place, all of the reality-bending crap that had taken place, and, well, why did I choose to go into that forest when I was told not to? Sure, I was concerned about that lady, but what did that do for me? I never even found her. Instead, I got a shitstorm of blood and pain. Not to mention the fact that I have no clue what's going on, or to be more accurate, why this is happening. I'm confused about my exact location or time. Did I die in that forest, or did I just crack and everything that's happening is some sort of psychotic breakdown? Is anything I do here real, or is it all just some sort of illusion? I feel no fatigue and my muscles only ache, even though I'm sure my arm was bitten off and rebitten during the second attack. But as I look at it, nothing seems to be wrong with it. The only indication I was ever hurt is a scar in the shape of the thing's maw. I need more evidence, more facts before I can form an opinion, and then, well, I'll go from there. As I finish my debating on what's happening, I hear the door open and I see the woman from when I got transported into that officer area. Her hair seems to be far straighter. It was brushed and reached down to her waist while some lay on her shoulders, and her clear blue eyes seemed to shine with the room lighting. She pulled a chair from a corner that I didn't previously check and sat right next to my bed. She didn't seem angry, which was quite surprising as I'd literally been her enemy the last time we'd met. Well, I guess I was in an alley before blacking out. And she let out a sigh and closed her eyes as if searching for the right words. I, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably at the strangeness of the situation. She began. Before you say a word, I'm going to tell you how this conversation is going to go. First, I'll ask a question and you'll answer. You'll not ask questions until I've finished with mine. You'll only answer the questions and will avoid talking before I'm done. Lastly, you shall not ask me if I feel like killing you, as I believe we're past that. She said this in a stern but soft voice which caught me off guard. Also, who says that? Shan't. Well, I nodded my head in agreement, as I wasn't in the position to challenge her, and her voice was nice to listen to, so it wasn't a big problem. Though I was curious as to what questions she could possibly have about me. I first want to know how you found our location, she said flatly. Well, a shaky man walked up to me, said a few words, and then a blinding light shot from his hand, and by the time I could see, I was at that office, I said. Well, she looked at me, and then said, What is your purpose for being here? Well, I was sent here to investigate the town, or I guess I should say my original purpose was to investigate a rural Alaskan town, I muttered, not having much of a choice. She eyed me with great suspicion and asked, How did you end up in a Texas city? Well, this hit me like a ton of bricks. I had my suspicions that I was in a different place due to the fact it was hot and humid with no snow in sight, but her confirming it made it seem unreal. How the hell did I end up in Texas? The mere thought was hard to process and brought an endless stream of questions. When that wolf monster attacked me, did I somehow survive and get transported back? Well, that wouldn't even make sense. None of it made sense. I wanted to ask her, but I remembered her words and held my tongue. She eyed me for another minute before continuing. Well, you seem shocked and confused, but I must continue with my questions. So if you were sent to investigate, does that mean you're a detective? No, I'm with SWAT. A police commissioner sent me to investigate something in that town, I stuttered out. Something seems off with that. Well, she now seemed annoyed and spat out, I want the truth. So stop telling such obvious lies and tell me what you really are." Well, I recoiled slightly and sputtered out, "That is the truth. I am a SWAT officer and I was supposed to investigate." Well, I couldn't remember what the point of going to that town was. It was like a haze now and clouded in my mind. Something was on the verge of my mind, but I couldn't remember what it was, no matter how hard I tried. Well, SWAT doesn't investigate. And why would a police commissioner send a cop to Alaska? Maybe you should have picked a better lie of being an FBI agent, or at least came up with a better story. She laughed the last bit of that sentence out. But she was right. None of what I was saying was making any sense. I tried to think back to the academy and the time I was on the force, but nothing came. I tried to remember my family and friends, however, all I got was the feeling that it was just out of my reach. I started to feel sick to my stomach. What am I doing here then? I mean, how did I end up in this situation if I don't even remember who I am or what I am? All I knew was my name. Hayden. Yes, I'm Hayden. That's who I am. Okay, I have an anchor and a lead as to who I am. I slowly inhaled and exhaled to recollect myself and calm down. Remember the 5, 5, 10 breathing. The woman studied me and nodded a little. Well, it seems you were telling the truth, but I guess I'll have to find the answers elsewhere. I have one more question before it's your turn. How did you manage to kill that hound? I don't know. I just did what my instincts told me. Standing there wasn't going to help, and if I did nothing, that would mean certain death, so I just fought, I said in a shaky voice. She again merely nodded. Oh, I wouldn't say I'm satisfied due to the new questions I have, but well, now it's your turn to ask me the questions that you have. Questions that I have? Where would I even begin to start with a list like that? Well, I finally had a chance to get some answers, so I was going to take it. What are those monsters? I said without even thinking about it. Those damn monsters had been making my life hell and put me through so much pain. I at least wanted to know what they are. I don't know. Honestly, they just showed up one day and have been a pain to deal with ever since. Now, before you ask, they have no known weakness, and honestly, it's impressive that you managed to kill one. She spoke to me in a flat tone. Obviously, it's a subject she doesn't enjoy talking about. So they just appeared? I asked. I'm not sure if they appeared or if they've been around the entire time. I do have a theory, but to be exact, the first is that something makes them, like some kind of brood mother. Now that's the obvious theory among my people, but there is another one. That these things are created by some sort of distorted will, like greed or wrath. Well, I can't be sure, but I am sure of one thing. They're lethal, she said. Well, that made goosebumps rise on my arms. On the bright side, at least I'm not the only one in the dark about what these things are. Well, that still leaves the question as to how to deal with these creatures in an efficient manner, as they have no weaknesses, and we don't know the origin. Okay, what's that weird light that shoots from your hands? This was another mystery I wanted to check off my list while I had the chance. Oh, that... Before she could finish, she was cut off by a man opening the door to my room. This wasn't just any man. It was the same shaky man in the red suit with the huge sword and glasses that concealed his eyes. The hilt of the sword clipped the door frame, and he had to make an awkward twist to fully get into the room. His glasses slid a bit due to the movement, causing him to push them back up as he turned back toward me and the girl. Sorry to interrupt you, Rin, but I have some bad news for the both of you, he said sheepishly. The woman I now know as Rin scoffed at this and said, What is it this time, you damn messenger? The last bit had a fusion of annoyance and anger. Okay, look, our guest and you have got to go into the field, the man said while putting his hands up defensively. Wait, field? I don't even know who you are, so why would I help you? I said with a mixture of confusion and interest. Sorry, but I don't feel like explaining, so I'll just send you both on your way, he said with a newfound confidence. Rin quickly tried to stammer out something, but it was too late, as the same blinding light appeared. As my eyes readjusted to the surroundings, I could see that I'd been transported into a room full of mannequins that occupied most of the giant building I was in. I looked to my right and found Rin looking around with what seemed to be high alert stitched onto her face. The lights in the building flickered with age and gave only a dim glow, lining most of the place in shadows. Oh, this building gave me the same adrenaline rush as the monsters that I'd been forced to fight, making me take a deep gulp as I thought about what lurked in those shadows. Rin's sudden grip on my shoulder made my heart slam into the back of my throat as I swung around to face her again. The light tan on her skin seemed to grow darker from the lack of light, and her blue eyes almost seemed to glow in the darkness. Though I'd apparently been staring for some time, as she gave me a death stare, so I decided to focus on finding a way out. I found a little success in my efforts as the far reaches of the building were shrouded in pitch-black darkness or covered in a pile of mannequins. Now, I took a longer look at the mannequins, and they seemed to be quite old, well past the point of deterioration, as most had missing chunks or missing limbs, though a few peculiar ones seemed to be missing eye indentations, which I found odd, but I didn't give much thought to. I was more glad that I don't have a phobia of mannequins. Well, it seems that an exit is nowhere to be found. God, that damn messenger sure does push my buttons. Rin's voice shook me out of my thoughts. So, this wasn't planned. Also, why did I get dragged along? I mean, my body still hurts from the last ordeal. I massaged a sore spot that seemed to pop out of nowhere as I was saying this. I have no clue why you keep getting dragged along, and it sure as hell wasn't planned. He does whatever he's told to by his master, even though he's one of the highest authorities in the agency. Her right hand did a weird hand motion as she finished her sentence. A sound resonated from a far corner. Plastic hitting concrete is what it resembled. Oh, my instinct screamed to run, but my feet stayed planted in some kind of false confidence. My blood was pumping, but it was more manageable than the fear I'd battled in the last few bouts of combat. Rin closed the distance between us, gluing herself next to my shoulder, stacking on me in the same way police officers would do when breaching a room. All right, we should start moving to a wall so we can more easily find an exit, she said in a surprisingly calm voice. I simply nodded. We both started to shuffle our way past groups of mannequins, some with eye indentations, others without. The growing tension left both of us silent as we stiffly looked at the large shadows that littered the building. Well, any moment, we were ready for one of those monsters to pop out and kill us. The silence was once again broken when we heard a snapping sound to our right, but the sound seemed to come from a good distance away, and so we proceeded on to find the nearest wall, although this time our footsteps seemed to make a cacophony of noise. Each step was some sort of blowhorn that bounced off the very walls. Oh, my blood ran cold as I could hear a snapping sound coming from my left. This time it sounded like it was only a few feet away. Rin and I both exchanged glances that gave a mutual understanding to be on guard as we proceeded further into the wasteland of decaying mannequins. Suddenly I saw something dart right from the corner of my eye. I tensed and instinctively reached for my gun. To my surprise, my hand made contact with a metal object, causing me to look down and see that I was wearing my combat gear. Well, I hadn't noticed, as I was used to the weight of it, and since I lacked my headgear, I'd just assumed that I was still in the same clothes from that room. Wait, what was I wearing in that room? Rin must have noticed my expression as she said, "Yes, that man also equipped you with your gear during that light." I wanted to ask what the hell that ability was, but I saw another bit of movement, and this time it was much closer. I unholstered the Glock and made sure it was on semi and not automatic. I also quickly checked the mag to make sure ammo was in it, and sure enough there was. And then I looked up just in time to see a faceless mannequin charging at me in long strides. I choked at the sight and raised my pistol at it. It felt good to have a gun in my hands again, and it was equally good to squeeze the trigger and hear the bark of the pistol. My aim was true, and I saw the head of the mannequin yank back as it ragdolled to the floor. But that was just the beginning. Quickly, thousands of the damn things came to life, limbs yanking and twisting and trying to make the body move. The twisted and decayed mannequin started to walk our way. "Oh, shit," I yelled as I swung my head to Rin. "Just run forward, you damned idiot," Rin screamed, causing me to break into a sprint. Thankfully, the path we were walking was still clear for the time being, but we had a long run, meaning the mannequins could start blocking our path. And if that happened, we were screwed. At least Rin was able to keep up with my pace, and she was still glued to my side. The horde of mannequins seemed to have gotten used to their limbs as they started to wobble their way toward us, a few of the nearest ones reaching out for us. One of them managed to get in front of us, so I aimed and shot at its featureless face. Rin and I leapt over the body and continued our mad dash to hopefully our salvation and not our demise, while more and more of them had started to gain speed and hurtled their way towards us. By now we could see some sort of wall, and I thought I could see the outline of some kind of door, which gave me a newfound boost of energy. I shot several more mannequins that had gotten in front of us, counting the number of bullets I had remaining, which sadly came out as only 10. Rin then shot the same light out of her hands to take care of the ones that were now within arm-reaching distance. And then, in a mere moment, I heard Rin shriek. I looked back to see that she'd been grabbed by one of the mannequins, but one soon turned to 3, and if I didn't act quickly, she'd be consumed by a horde of them. Well, I had a decision to make. Either I continued to run and made it to the door, or I fought off the mannequins holding Rin back. But then again, why would I rescue her? I mean, she'd been more of a liability than an asset. Well, sure, she'd help me, but I still did most of the work. Why should I risk my life to help a stranger who probably wouldn't do the same for me? Oh, fuck it, I swore as I came to my realization. The realization that no matter how much I thought of my continual survival, I couldn't leave her to die like that. The simple fact was that it's against my nature to do something so cruel. I shot the 2 heads that I could see, and then ran up to her. Well, by now another 3 had grabbed her. I slammed the muzzle of the pistol to the faceless head of one and shot, then swung the gun that held Rin's legs and did the same. Well, I hated getting so close, but I couldn't risk accidentally shooting Rin, so this was the only option. Well, at least I didn't have to worry about missing my shots. By now only 2 held Rin in place, though I could hear Rin's choked breathing as one attempted to strangle her, while the other wrapped itself around her arms and torso. I twisted around Rin and blasted the one strangling her, and started to yank the one wrapped around her off enough to be able to shoot it without moving. I managed to yank its head off her and lined up a shot, but as soon as I squeezed the trigger, the thing had jolted its head to Rin's body, making my shot miss by a large amount of space. I once again wrestled the thing to get it off her, and she managed to land an elbow into its face, sending it reeling from the hit. I grabbed its featureless face and shot it point blank. By now the horde of mannequins had caught up with us, and I had to stomp on arms to avoid getting grabbed. I pushed Rin forward and followed behind her as she sprinted toward the door. However, as I was running, one of the damn creatures caught my leg, and I face-planted onto the ground. I could feel the blood pouring from my nose as I tried to kick the mannequin off. The kicking seemed to have no effect on this one, so I pointed and shot the thing. I stumbled back up into a standing position just in time for another one to grab onto my left arm, so I once again smashed the muzzle of the pistol to its head and shot it in the center. Rin was now a good bit ahead of me as I twisted and weaved through the ever-growing walls of arms on my sides until 2 decayed mannequins popped up in front of me. I aimed at the left one and blasted a hole through it, and then I pointed and shot the right one, and then I heard a click instead of the usual bark. I'd used up all of my ammo, saving Rin. So, I did the only thing I could think of in that situation. I flipped the gun and got ready to bash its head in. Well, this might work or it might not. I had no time to dwell on the possibilities, but I couldn't afford to hesitate. So I slammed the butt of the gun to the side of its head, sending it careening into a nearby group of them. I let out a sigh of relief. Well, that was until I saw a group of them standing in my way. It was like the universe was telling me to fuck off and die. Well, if I was going to die, then I'd go down fighting. My muscles tensed. I gritted my teeth and prepared to fight like hell. Well, that was until I saw a red vortex slam into the center one, causing it to fly towards me. I brushed that one to the side as the farthest right one went down next, and then the farthest left one's head exploded in a confetti of material. I slammed my gun into the right one and pushed the left one out of my way. "Get the hell over here!" I heard Rin yell as she covered me from the now open door. My feet slammed into the ground as I hauled ass to Rin and the door, fighting off the odd mannequin here and there who'd managed to crawl its way towards me. I almost ran over Rin as I barreled through the doorway into what seemed to be a lobby area. She slammed the door behind us, and I grabbed a nearby chair to block it, hoping for some sort of miracle that the chair could hold off thousands of mannequins. Rin and I looked around the room frantically, and both saw another door and ran toward that one next. As we reached the second door, the first one shattered and mannequins started to pool into the lobby area. I yanked this door open and came face to face with the outside world. I stumbled out of the door and jumped down a small set of stairs, Rin slamming the door shut and mirroring my movement. Well, this time we ran through tight alleyways, hoping to lose the horde if they were following. And after what felt like an eternity, we finally felt that we'd made it a good way away from the accursed building, both of us panting heavily from the ordeal that had just transpired. I leaned against a nearby wall to catch my breath and take some of the weight off my legs. Rin went to my left and sat atop a dumpster. I needed some water badly, but I guess I'd have to survive without it for the time being. A silence befell both of us, as if we weren't sure what to say. We'd both saved each other in some kind of way, making me feel good that I guessed the type of person she was. That still didn't stop her from saying, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you for saving me, even if what you did was idiotic." Jeez, you really had to add the idiot part, didn't you? I chuckled out. I then heard a set of footsteps start to close in from my right, causing both Rin and I to jolt up from our resting position. I then quickly realized that I'd never switched the mag of my gun, so I slammed the mag release, unwrapped the spent bullets and shots to see if I had a spare mag in one of my pockets. Well, thankfully my hands found a full mag. I swung it out of the pocket and slammed it into the Glock, racking the slide as I readied the pistol in a firing stance. A man swaggered round the corner. Lucky for him, I know how to keep my index finger extended. Nevertheless, we both stayed tense as the man in front of us was giving off a very strange feeling, almost a disarming feeling, a feeling that made us feel safe and warm, that we could trust this man. He was in his early 30s with deep red hair, a stubbly moustache with a set of perfect white teeth that seemed to radiate from the light. His almond-browed eyes seemed to look at you with a sense of familiarity and welcome you with open arms. However, his long fingernails gave a sense of unease to me. His sharp face also seemed to be almost mask-like. Every feature he had seemed a little too perfect to be human. Well, his appearance seemed to make me tense up harder, and I found my finger slowly inching its way closer to the trigger, as if this was an enemy that needed to be put down. I also got the strange feeling that I'd seen this man somewhere before, but I couldn't place where. The man looked at me first, sizing me up before turning his attention to Rin. When he saw Rin, he licked his lips and said, "Oh, I'm going to enjoy playing with you." He smiled as he continued to stare, and that's when I felt the bloodlust start to seep from him. This was going to be a very bad time. "You aren't supposed to be here, boy." He said this to me after he was done eye-stripping Rin. "I'm certain I had, my dear Darlene. Well, what are you?" After a moment, his face had a bored-like expression on it, causing him to say, "Never mind. I'll just doze off while you explained what you are. I will say this. This is going to be fun." He chuckled then and had a glint in his soulless eyes when he said, "Well, it'll be fun for me at least. For both of you, it'll be pure hell." His chuckle then started to distort as his body started to morph. His bones started to creak and crack as his arms extended, his back arching forward as if a weight was planted on his neck. I saw his nail beds pop out, and long yellow talons started to protrude from his now mangled hands, the palms of which were planted onto the concrete of the alleyway. His legs twisted as they seemed to grow hair and morph into a pair of mountain goat legs. His torso was also going through a similar transformation. His ribs now protruded from his once sleek white button-down shirt, exposing his now almost hollow chest that had a grey hue. That once perfect face was now one befitted for his true self. Instead of immaculate white teeth, they had become yellowed with black spots of decay, twisted and uneven. Most of his face was now missing patches of skin, showing either greyed muscle or yellowed skull. Antlers started to grow from the top of his head, jagged and ancient, patches of skull and skin hanging from them. Almond brown eyes turned to pitch black. The man that stood before me was no man at all, but a monster who wore the skin of one. The thing smiled with its decayed mouth and let out a deep and low chuckle. I shot 2 or 3 times once I'd managed to get out of my stupor, and Rin followed in quickly with a volley of her magic bullets. But the creature didn't even flinch, nor did it flinch when I let out another 4 bullets. This goddamn monster shrugged off our attacks like raindrops, letting out another low chuckle at our futile attempts. The creature went into a weird squat position as it angled its head towards me. By the time I realized what it was doing, it was too late. "Oh, shit," was all I could manage before I felt the thing headbutt me, antlers slicing into my sides as I was sent hurtling backward. Part 4. I can feel my heart hammer against my ribcage as I crash into a brick wall, head slamming against the hard surface. My vision whitens as the pain seeps into every crevice of my body, head to toe filling with a blazing inferno. I gasp out shallow, quick breaths in some sort of vain attempt to gain control over my body. My vision refocuses, allowing me to see the gangly creature approaching Rin, who attempted to stave off the beast with blasts of energy which only bounced off its horrendous skin. Even with the blasts, the creature's stride never broke, gaining feet on her with each passing second. I attempted to get up and would have succeeded if I hadn't spewed forth a fountain of blood in a coughing fit. God, it was hard to breathe. Shit, the pain no longer enveloped my entire body. Sure, I ached everywhere, but my torso felt like concrete. My bones were definitely broken, and that's if I was lucky, though I could sense my lungs were now fucked. The beast was standing right in front of Rin, smiling as she shot him, though it probably only tickled him. This was amusing. It heaved its putrid hand in the air and swung down. Rin nimbly avoided the attack and let out another volley, forcing the creature to slightly sway as the blast hit the armpit of the creature. I slammed my back against the wall and flexed my calves as I tried to push through the pain the old-fashioned way. Well, there was no time to sit and twiddle my thumbs, as my partner was being attacked, and I had to act. Searing pain riddled my body as I slowly slid my way up the wall, my teeth clenched together as I continued to endure the onslaught. I started to laugh through the pain as a euphoric sensation spread through my body. I was almost in a standing position now, and I was moving forward. Now standing on numb legs, I could see that Rin and the now annoyed monstrosity were interlocked in a battle of mobility, Rin outclassing the thing in dodging and movement. I managed a mix of waddling and shuffling that worked as a slow walk, but pain shooting through my torso at each step. I had to continue. It was the only option I had. I realized that my gun was gone, and a chuckle escaped my lips as I reached for my knife that was strapped to my leg, reminding me of my first encounter against the wolf, the beginning of this fucked up situation. I was halfway to the beast when its arm managed to land a blow on Rin's arm, crimson blossoming from her. She let out a scream, allowing the thing to land a blow against her chest. Her body flew limply towards me as she landed against a trash can to my left. Now my blood boiled, and my shuffle transformed into a shaky run. I no longer felt pain as I stared at my enemy. Its mouth swelled up into a disjointed smile as its gangly body walked towards me. I arced the blade to connect with its grotesque throat. The blade stopped at the skin as if it had just struck a brick wall. In my haste, I left my body open, and the monster attempted to take advantage of that. I tripped my way past the outstretched clawed hand. Instead of it taking advantage of me, I'd take advantage of it. I swung my blade against the nape of its neck, only to be met with the same lack of success as the first. Again, I barely managed to avoid its grotesque hand, and aim for the back of its knee. Another futile attempt. Well, this time it managed to grab onto my arm, sinking its claws in as it let out a rough and beaten laugh. A blast of energy came from its open mouth, rocking the thing's head, and I took this opportunity to yank my bloodied arm free and backpedal towards the origin of this blast, never taking my eyes off the monster. I slid next to Rin, and out of the corner of my eye I could see the beaten woman shakily stand with one palm open and outstretched in front of her. "Oh, we're in a sticky situation, aren't we?" I said with a shaky voice. "This predicament is really bad. I'd say run, but the way it clobbered you and me, I don't think that's in the cards for us." "Then what the hell do we do, Rin?" "Well, that's part of the plan I haven't figured out yet." She said this with a numb coldness to her voice. Planless and battling against eternal sleep, I'd say I was in a hopeless mindset. Was all the struggling we'd done for nothing? Had I really just prolonged my suffering? No, I had to think about a solution. I couldn't leave room for doubt or contemplate meaningless thoughts. Rin let loose another volley as the creature's smiling face drew ever closer. His goddamn grinning face was staring at me the same way that wolf was. Yeah, it was toying with us. It found pleasure in our suffering. The more I thought of how it found pleasure in this, the more my head pounded. The switch seemed to snap on, though. A rage that enveloped me, erasing the pain and replacing it with adrenaline. Yeah, I was going to make it pay. "I want you to shoot around the armpit," I said. "Why?" "I want to verify something I saw earlier. Right, I'll set up the shot for you," I said sternly through gritted teeth. I then launched forward, and in 2 strides I was stabbing at the thing's face. Well, obviously it bounced off again. However, I knew I had its attention. And as it swiped its long arm at me, I grabbed hold of it, twisting my body so I was back to back with its bony back and maneuver its body to give Rin a view of its now exposed armpit. I had attempted to yank its arm free, but my grip was iron-clasped, and I refused to let it get away from me. She sent a volley of 4 blasts into its exposed armpit, resulting in a shudder from the creature. I'd been correct in my assumption. I twisted the accrued being's arm, contorting it in unnatural ways as I jammed my knife into its underarm. I was met with a squelch as the blade sank into the rotten flesh, making the monstrosity let out a guttural growl of pain. I didn't let up. No, I repeatedly jammed the knife in and out as fast as I could, dark ooze bursting with each consecutive puncture. The monster was now howling and screaming in a high pitch, and I could hear the pain and anger in its voice. I didn't get to relish this small victory for long, as the beast did a twisting motion that sent me flying into a bag of trash. However, Rin kept up the assault. For some reason, her blasts of high-velocity energy only left small singe marks on its sickly skin. Even though I'd managed to land quite a bit of damage to the creature, it only acted like a bee had stung it, tenderly rubbing at the massive puncture holes on its underarm. I then realized that my body felt like it was being held down by vines, my arms feeling constricted and my legs not responding. I guess the damage I'd substantiated finally registered with my brain. Not only did the pain once again assail me, but something new did as well, and that was fear. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest, thoughts racing through my mind as I considered my probability of survival. Thoughts like, what if I can't get it back up? Or, what if I can't kill this thing? Well, such thoughts were persistent even though I tried to push them out of the back of my mind. I had to breathe. 5, 10. With that little sequence, I was able to finally go back to a calm state of mind, and the feeling of gaining mobility in my legs and arms came back, along with that state of mind. I once again strained my body to get to a standing position, giving me a look at the battle that was unfolding in front of me. Rin looked the worse for wear. She now had a long, bloodied scratch along her back, and a slightly smaller one along her waist. The monster seemed to only have suffered a small blackened spot in its armpit. I gritted my teeth and focused on reaching the demon. I pounded my feet on the concrete. The knife lay at an upward angle, ready to taste the thing's blood. I slammed past Rin and hurtled all of my body weight into a thrust straight into its side. Well, this time I knew that it would hurt it, and I had a feeling that this time it would work. As the beast contemplated how to best swat me away, I twisted the blade and yanked it down the side of the monster. The blade traveled from the thing's underarm all the way to its kneecap as I pulled it back. Black ooze poured from it now, and the creature stumbled back, rotted teeth forming a pained grin, antlers knocking into the wall as it planted its back against it. "You impudent meat sack, I'll rip you apart," it roared as it charged at me. This time I was the one with a grin plastered on my face. As I finally saw it, I saw that this thing did have a weakness. It no longer was an unbeatable behemoth that could only be hurt. No, it could be killed. And this revelation was like a glimmering light that I had to grasp. As it ran at me, I jumped out of its way, and as it passed, I slammed the knife into its side. This used its own movement against it, and pulling it off was a simple matter. It screeched as it slammed antler first into the wall with a loud crunch. I slowly walked toward it as it got up. One antler had been broken off and lay on the ground. The beast had become even more contoured and grotesque. Bones that were previously bound by leather skin had started to jut out of it. Its mouth, that once had a row of yellowed and rotted teeth, lay barren with only a black pit. "What? I can't be losing. No. The monster slowly began to break down into gibberish. I wanted to make a snarky comment or belittle the babbling thing, but I was too tired. So I just looked up at an equally withered Rin, who looked like she could barely stand straight. "Mother said that I was strong. She said I could play with whatever I wanted and not get hurt. She lied to me." Its voice now rose to a fever pitch as it broke down at the seams. I took this moment as it clutched its hideous head to attack its exposed side, firmly planting the blade deep in and ripping it across from the underarm to the flesh that remained on the chest. The blade snagged the flesh, pulling down the entire frontal part of its skin. I could now see its shriveled up organs, and could also see the rot that emitted from them. The anatomy of the creature seemed to mirror a human, making my hair stand up. In the center of the chest sat a weird, oval-shaped object that seemed to quelch and buckle every second or so. Well, that must be its heart. I raised my blade and attempted to stab the heart, but the monster flinched out of the way, making me dig into what I assumed was a lung. It wheezed up more black ooze as it battered me away, and I managed to stop my blade before I hit the wall of the alley. Rin took over the assault with a tornado of blasts that actually seemed to burn the creature's organs. We'd done substantial damage to the monster, and it finally started to develop what I assumed was fear. It looked like it finally realized that it had made a dire mistake in thinking it could toy with us. "Oh, you goddamn bitch," the thing spat at Rin. Rin merely shrugged off the insult that had been hurled at her, and kept her focus on taking the grotesque creature down. I once again got up by some miracle. The feeling in my extremities had long since passed. I couldn't feel a thing. All I wanted to do was fall asleep and finally get some rest. But I had a mission to complete, one that I had no intention of failing at either. So I charged into battle once again. I cleaved my knife through the creature's kidney and sliced through the small intestine and large intestines. The freak of nature barfed out another pint of blood before falling onto one knee, holding both hands to protect its decayed heart. I cleaved out its remaining lung and started to hack on its arms. The beast fell on its back, giving ample leverage room to use my remaining power and combined gravity to hack its left arm into 2 pieces. I almost grew deaf from the howl, the shrieks and the rambling that the thing was doing. It flung its remaining arm in a vain attempt to stop my hacking and slashing, though I could tell that it was merely for show, as the creature had no more strength left to fight with. Looking at it, with its mangled arm raised as some sort of shield, made it look truly pathetic. A being that caused pain to me and my friend was now reduced to this by the very same people. Well, the irony of the situation was not lost on me. I grabbed the arm and yanked it away from its position, giving me a full view of the heart of the creature. I then plunged my dull blade into its chest. Its eyes, that had once held vicious intent, now faded with fear etched into them, letting out a death rasp with it. Knowing that it had not expected to die by what it had assumed to be 2 humans made a sense of pride wash over me. I didn't bother with pulling the blade out of its heart. It deserved some rest after all. Who knew that a simple tactical knife could kill a monstrosity like that? I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned my head slightly to see Rin gripping my shoulder with some force. Blood and grime lined her fingernails. Her own blood dripped down her arm from the wound the beast had given her. She didn't need to tell me that her hand was what stopped me from falling flat onto my face. "You're beaten to hell." "What?" I asked, due to her sudden pause. "What's your name?" she said with a neutral face. I wheezed out as I realized I hadn't even told her my name. Oh, how improper. "Shouldn't you know that already?" I continued. "If I knew everything about you, why would I have to ask you all these questions? Are you stupid?" she said with an annoyed tone. "It's Hayden. Well, I hope it is." "Well, I would hope you know your own name. With that late introduction out of the way, we need to find ourselves a nice place to sit down," she said. My entire body felt numb. The wounds on my side held a dull ache along with my chest. I was beaten to hell. Well, luckily not literally. I could assume the same could be said about Rin, who led me to a spot that didn't have blood or trash around it. "The agency should be picking us up soon," she said with a hopeful tone. "What exactly is the agency?" I asked. I was hoping I could make use of this time, as falling asleep could be a one-way ticket to my demise, which I would like to avoid. "I guess you got kind of thrust into this situation without much say. Well, I guess I could use this time to provide some answers. The agency is an organization designed with one purpose in mind: destroy all threats to humanity." "What do you mean by threats, Rin?" "Well, by threats I mean things like what we just fought, or what had attacked us back at our temporary operating base. Creatures that have the sole purpose of killing humans." She said this with a cold chill. She seemed to want to continue, but was hesitant to. "And," I said with the intention of finding out more. I'd finally started to get some headway into what the hell was happening, and I wasn't about to let the chance pass me by. I wanted to pursue this knowledge. And I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I don't think it'll matter since you've proved to be an asset to the agency. Well, the best way I can explain all of this might be by telling you my original mission here. Okay. What is it? Well, I and about 10 others were sent here to investigate. About a year ago, a massacre had happened at a police station. Everyone inside was butchered to the point that we couldn't identify anyone. We could only assume that all the staff inside had died and any bystanders would be filed missing. Honestly, we just wrote it off. Well, strange happenings occur more often than you'd think. Well, that is until another one happened. She paused, wincing slightly from her wounds. Well, about 7 occurred. All happened within a month. That's when we decided that this wasn't something that would just hopefully go away, and we hoped that it was some monster who would do it once every 20 years and not be seen. Sadly, that wasn't the case. We tracked the locations of potential spots that this thing would either go to after each attack, or to find its next target, and this caused a discovery to be made. We found this. She limply used her good arm to show me the walls. You found the city? I replied. Well, precisely. This wasn't on any maps we had, and well, this place shouldn't exist. The only reason we found it was by sending some people to scout potential locations for a den, and instead they found a bustling town that was rich with people and resources. How is that even possible? Confusion swirled in my head as I contemplated the implications of this. How could a town just appear out of thin air, much less grow to this size without being on any maps? Well, ironically, the most sensible conclusion was that it had been transported, similar to what could have happened to me. Holy shit, I yelled, causing my body to violently remind me that I was in rough shape. What? Rin said in surprise. Well, I'd assumed that I'd been potentially transported from Alaska to this place. But what if I hadn't just been transported? What if the entire town had been transported? Now, there are some flaws, like how I was in a lush green forest. The town was in terrible condition, and the place looked like a max of 100 people lived there. Well, that now seems to be the most plausible, I said with some confidence. Wouldn't it make more sense if a well-populated and busy town was transported and the residents were just influenced that this was normal? Rin asked quizzically. Yeah, and I would have said that if not for me. There has to be a reason that I ended up in a town that just so happened to have a few monstrous residents inhabiting it. Well, you definitely make a valid point. And luckily it's only a few residents that are monstrous in nature and not the entire town. She laughed then, and that was the first time I'd heard her laugh, and it sounded genuine. It was kind of sweet. Though the moment was short-lived as her expression soon turned back to one better fitted to our current situation. Well, I for one wish that damn messenger was more truthful. I know for a fact he's hiding something, she said with a spiteful tone. Yeah, he's the one who transported me into that clusterfuck with that camelback freak, and he knew where I was. I then realized that I had a couple more questions that had slipped my mind. Hey, does a scarlet-eyed woman hang around that jittery man with that sword? I asked. Oh, you must be talking about Marie. Yes, she sometimes helps him out. She then paused before saying, that man's name is Carlos, and if you haven't already, you'll find out he's a huge prick. Yeah, I kind of figured that out. Actually, how did you know about Marie? Oh, I saw both Carlos and Marie when I got attacked by a monster wolf. It was actually back when I think I was initially transported. He didn't tell you about that? A headache burrowed its way into my head then. No, but then again I'm not privy to that information. Only the upper ranks know the goings-on. I'm more of a grunt. She made a disgruntled sigh after that. Hey, one last question. I'm not sure if you know this, but how do I keep getting all this military gear to fight with? Oh, that, yeah. Well, Carlos has special abilities that can do things like that. Also, it helps that the organization is well connected to the US military. That could explain the weapon cache in my hotel room, but that doesn't explain how I ended up in that room. Maybe Carlos and Marie had carried me there. But why? There were still too many pieces missing from the puzzle, not to mention why these monsters were even here in the first place. But more importantly, what part would I play in this grand scheme of things? My thoughts were interrupted when Rin had a coughing fit, blood soaking into the palm of her raised hand. It seemed like she was nearing her limits as well. I'd been aware of my darling's senses, but I wondered if she was going to be able to withstand the blood loss for much longer. So, how exactly will this agent help our injuries when they finally arrive? I asked, both out of concern for my dwindling health as well as Rin's. It'll probably be an agent who can manipulate your body's cells to enhance the healing process, she said with a voice that was almost like a whisper. This helped me realize a question that I'd asked earlier but was interrupted before I'd gotten an answer. What exactly are those lights that come out of your hands? Well, I'd forgotten that the damned messenger stopped me before I gave you an answer. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I recall that a superior said it was the manipulation of kinetic and potential energy. We're taught how to draw and combine both of those energies, resulting in the light show that happens. And here I thought it was some sort of arcane art or magic ability, I said with a raspy chuckle. Well, it could be. I only know what my superior told me. Who knows if he was lying? She said with a shrug. Either way, I had a plausible explanation as to what the lights were, and this conversation certainly had enlightened me and given me a general idea of what the hell had been happening. It certainly was a nice change of pace compared to merely going with the flow. I finally saw a figure making their way over to the spot that Rin and I were in. As I looked at the figure, I saw a familiar critter skitter by, a lizard with leopard print on its scaly skin. The peculiar part was that I felt as if I'd seen the little guy somewhere. I couldn't place where. The agent finally approached both Rin and I. The figure was only 5'11", wearing a black robe, akin to one you might see mages wear in a fantasy video game, with a hood that they wore to cover the majority of their face. He stopped about 10 feet from Rin and I. I also noticed the heavy suitcase he was hauling with his right hand. He dropped the suitcase to the ground, making a resounding thud as it connected, and then he lifted his left hand, producing a purple and black swirl of energy. He turned it into a sort of ray that he beamed on both Rin and I, a ray that had a cold chill, but the product of it being on my skin was that I could see that the wounds I'd sustained slowly were seeming to fade. I could feel the cuts and gashes close and felt my bones mend back together. The previous pressure I felt in my chest had vanished. My breathing was steady and the pain was gone. I'd been healed. I also felt invigorated, as if my stamina was renewed along with my wounds. Rin seemed to be in the same state. Now, my clothes were still in a terrible condition, but that was minor compared to my body being restored. The cloaked figure then kneeled next to the suitcase and unclasped it. The inside of the case held a new set of weapons for my use, along with ammo. In it sat a K-bar knife with an M9 Beretta to the right of it. But the centerpiece was an HK UMP sitting beautifully above the knife and Beretta. Mags of ammo dotted the remaining space in the large suitcase, along with a new holster for the Beretta. I took off the destroyed holster that I had and put the new one on my duty belt, making sure it sat securely on it. I then carefully sheathed the K-bar knife and restocked my ammo pouches. With new weapons and more ammo, I was set to go. Now was the time to ask this mysterious person why they'd just restocked my equipment and who they were. Who are you? I'm the person tasked with healing both you and Rin, and I'm here to tell you your next mission, the nondescriptive figure said in a neutral tone. Are you fucking kidding me? We nearly died 10 minutes ago, I yelled without thinking. Yeah, assigning us to another mission without giving us some time to recoup is insane at best, Rin said with an icy tone to her voice. I have healed both of you. I have also re-equipped your material weapons and energy reserves. There's no reason for you to both not be able to proceed, the voice said. There is a goddamn reason as to why we can't. Just because you healed and rearmed us doesn't mean we're mentally prepared to go through another shitstorm of a mission, I yelled spitefully. I suppose you have a point. However, there is one problem with that, which is that you both don't have a choice. You have killed one of the alphas of the pack, which has caused ripples throughout the town. The only way you both survive this is by completing the mission. Fine. What exactly is the mission we're assigned to? Rin asked with a cold tone. Kill all the inhabitants of this town. That is what is required of both of you, the voice said coldly. I stared in belief at what I just heard. What kind of mission was that? Weren't we supposed to protect these people? Why are we killing the people that are unrelated? Rin asked sharply. Oh, you'll find out when you exit this alley. This place is one hell of a disguise for these things. Explains why their growth was so rapid. After the figure said this, he turned to leave, not giving any chance for questions. I tried to pipe up, but the silhouette had taken a right into an adjacent alley. Well, this day was just one clusterfuck after another. Well, I suppose we should be off. Nothing for us here, and we don't get anything done or figured out if we just sit here, Rin said with a flourish. All right. Guess it's back into the frying pan for us then. We made our way through the winding alleys filled with trash and debris, along with a disgusting smell as well. As we walked through this landscape of decay, I thought about what my future would hold after I'd finally finished this struggle. Well, my first priority, of course, was to find out who I was and how I'd wound up in this hellscape. But what then? My thoughts were interrupted once what seemed to be a road appeared ahead of Rin and I, marking the end of the alleys. Rin turned her head and gave a stiff nod once we made eye contact. Be ready for anything, she said sharply. Of course, I responded back. We bound onto the open road and found a similar sight of market sellers hollering for potential customers to check their wares. All of the perfect faces filled with a type of hunger and desire, one I didn't realize the first time I'd come here. Now they all reminded me of that monster. And then, in what seemed to be a mere moment, their heads snapped toward us. Some of the passersby stared in a confused daze as to what had just happened. The poor people didn't have much time to contemplate before the first market seller swung their head back and sunk its grotesque teeth into a woman who'd previously been perusing the shopkeep's wares. Then the others followed suit, and the ones that had quickly eaten their fill slinked towards Ren and I. I now understood the mission in full clarity. This whole God-forsaken town was the nest of those fucked-up creatures from hell. Well, a weird and wonderful one that was, don't you think? And I have to say, I think a lot more is coming. That story is nowhere near over, so if you enjoyed that, please leave some nice comments below the video and encourage the author to keep going with this one. Really intriguing start. No idea where it's heading, but I think there is a lot more. Well, thanks as ever for joining me this evening, and I'll definitely be back again soon. Till the next time, my dear friends, sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.